We're going to be starting with the land acknowledgement, and sorry for the dishevelment, everybody. We're just short a few people, but as always, welcome to Race and Policing. My name is YVETTE, and I'm just happy to continue the conversation. So we recognize that California State University, San Bernardino, sits on the territory and ancestral land of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. We recognize that every member of the California State University San Bernardino community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1965. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples by offering this land acknowledgement. We affirm Indigenous sovereignty, and we will work to hold California State University San Bernardino more accountable to the needs of American Indians and Indigenous peoples. So, before I introduce our film, I'm going to go ahead and give a brief update about what's been going on. So, this past week, June 14th, Governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Wolf, has signed Act 57 into law. This law makes available disciplinary records of officers during the hiring process. The hope is to improve the vetting process, thus improving the quality of officers. This past week, Sergeant Janak Amin was fired from Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. Amin threatened and pointed a gun at an unarmed Black man. Amin was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. You may recall in 2018, Stephen Clark, an unarmed Black man, was shot several times and killed by Sacramento County officers. In August 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom signed the Stephen Clark Law. This law, or Assembly Bill 392, states that officers use deadly force only when necessary, but not reasonable. This wording was critical in securing the second-degree murder charge for Sheriff's Deputy Aaron Russell, who shot and killed San Diego resident Nicholas Bills. And also, we're still waiting for the people who murdered Breonna Taylor to be brought to justice. And I would also like to introduce the film that we're going to be screening. This film is called White Like Me. It's a documentary by Tim Wise. It's a discussion with organizers and students where we talk about what it's like to be white in America and what you can do basically to be a better ally by first acknowledging the privilege that you benefit from. It's a really good documentary that I've seen myself in. I hope you all enjoy it. So,
can I just say a couple of things about it, YVETTE? Thank you so much for opening that discussion up for us and for that update on, you know, what's going on in the country. I did see one city has actually is attempting to make officers take out insurance on their own dime for their actions, because so much of our taxpayer money is going to pay settlements for officers who have not done the right thing in the field. But getting back to the film, I've shown this film in my class several times, and students are always blown away. Tim Wise was an anti-racist before we even knew that term. He has been working on the ground for probably, and I've known of him for about 20 years now. And he is, you know, I'm not sure if it's in this particular film, but he talks about his journey from a young, privileged Southern white man. I believe he is either from Tennessee or Virginia, and his transformation. And like with many of us, it happened in college for him. So I hope that whoever is going to stay with us on this film will view it with an open heart, an open mind, And please ask questions afterwards. We have a Q&A button at the bottom so that you can ask questions or concerns, or do you think he's full of it, or just whatever. We'll take any and all comments. Just be nice about it. And before we start the film, Marlo, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself, and then you can take us into the film.
All right. So Marlo Brooks here. Sorry I'm late, guys. I was just having a little issues with my computer, and everything is fixed now. I'm glad. There was just some update issues, but we're here now. I am Marlo Brooks, your co-host for the evening on Conversations on Race and Policing, joined alongside my co-host Yvette. And we just thank you again for coming back each week and joining us. And for those who are new, just want to remind you there is a Q&A button at the bottom, just like Mary Texeira just described. The way our program works is we push the hot topic issues or social issues in our world today. And you may have questions. It may not be about the film. It may not be about what's being discussed from panelists. You may have questions of what's going on in your community or within your group of peers and things like that. So if you have any questions, just please feel free to write them down below, and we will address them as we get through the show tonight. So we want to thank you again for being here, and we're gonna Mary, I'm gonna pass it back over to you to introduce the film, if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah, the film is about an hour. And I think a little less than an hour, but I think you'll be riveted by everything he has to say. And it really is in the form of a lecture, but a lot of us who are university professors wish we could lecture like this. So he's who we want to be when we grow up. So without any further delay, let's watch the film.
How over U.S. history, over decades, really beyond any individual person, we have these historical patterns. And so thinking about how institutions like healthcare or, housing and histories of the suburbs and the, investments in home ownership going back to the 1930s and 40s and on to the present, right? All those things create a background that we need to understand if we want to be able to address issues like policing or issues like, injustice that we find today, right? And so I think as we think about our larger conversation around policing, it's really important to think about how, of course, individual officers or departments may be guilty of misconduct. Clearly that's an issue, but also it's important to recognize how these individual cases, be they Mike Brown or the more recent cases, Trayvon Martin, and the list goes on, Sandra Bland and so forth. We want to understand how these individual cases are part of this broader pattern of inequality and injustice that we need to keep in mind if we really want to think seriously about solutions and so forth. So I think that's just kind of a little bit more context as we think about how this film then kind of bears on our larger conversation about race and policing.
Yeah, I wanted to point out how he talked a lot about, he kind of danced around it. I don't know if he directly mentioned talking about dog whistle politics, and how when you get into that conversation that he brings up about Republican strategists literally coming up with dog whistles to target racist constituents for their approval. For me, it reframes it in a way that puts a lot more responsibility on the people who are in charge. It really, when I first heard that recording, I think maybe freshman year when I first heard it, for me, it solidified that everything we're talking about is not a conspiracy theory, and that there really is that you can't continue to ascribe our failure to our own personal choices, and that frankly, Black excellence is a myth. This idea that because this one Black person did it, you should be able to do it too, that's an exception. That person was literally was obviously put in their own work, but I can't say that there weren't people who were along the way probably said, this person, okay, but the rest of them, no, because we already did one. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think,
most white people can't do what Barack Obama did or Oprah, because Oprah was the, you know, she was the model before Barack Obama came along. And, you know, I heard a lot. If Oprah can do it, anyone can do it. And Oprah, I think, even said that. If I can do it, anybody can do it. But we know that there are a lot of different things that happen in an individual's life to account for that person's success. Many times it starts with a teacher in school, and it has a lot to do with the educational system. Has a lot to do with being in the right place at the right time, and frankly, it has a lot to do with whether white people approve of you. I mean, and I think in reading the biographies of Oprah and Barack Obama, that was a huge component. You know, people loved Oprah, right? She just started out as I think it was in Memphis, you know, radio host and television host, and then she's, you know, catapulted to fame, and now is, you know, one of the richest African-American women in the world. But there are so many explanations as to why someone is successful. But does race hold us back? That those two ideas are not mutually exclusive. You can be successful, but you can also have millions and millions and millions of people who are being held back in terms of low-wage jobs, poor housing, poor school systems, etc. So it's not as simple as many of the racists would have us believe, that if, you know, and that conversation that Tim Wise shared with in this film, that you know, you all should be able to do this, you all should be able to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, etc. Those are myths. Those are huge myths in this country, that we live in a meritocracy. I have been around some extremely mediocre white men, and I was expected to be far and above the kinds of things that they did, and they didn't try at all. You know, I'm not saying every white man I've ever worked with was mediocre, but there's a lot of mediocrity out there. You know, that they've had 500 years to BS their way through that mediocrity, right? So, do we have other questions, Marlo, that you would like to address?
No, just the same. Before we get into the Q&A section, just the same review of the film we just watched. You know, there was a lot of strategy and ploy developed to keep a ethnicity in its place, keep a class down, and whether white people choose to see it, you know, or they just truly have their beliefs set, you know, there is a social, there is a racial bias in this country, and it's been strategically processed throughout our decades and through our economy, through our communities. So the same thing that I saw in the film, it just spoke up. It reminded me a lot of the film The 13th, which I'm sure we may get a chance to view one day on this show. But it was more of a lighter sense of the 13th, which we're speaking of the 13th Amendment. The 13th take you into graphic detail of this history's upbringing through the labor of minority people in this country, and to blatantly say that everybody has equal opportunity, that's just choosing to ignore the bias in this country. It's never been that way. The most I could say about racial tension, you know, in this country is that this is the thickest I've ever seen it in my time, you know, in my generation. Of course, it was there all throughout my childhood, all through growing up, the opportunities that were, you know, being overpassed, but to see it at the forefront the way it is now, and still be able to, you know, vastly say, no, we all have the same rights, and you know, you should stop complaining, or that, you know, they should stop complaining and really apply themselves and get off of welfare, and just to hear those kind of comments and things like that. But you know, it's hard to hear, but it further proves that, you know, these constraints still hold us to this day. So before we get into Q&As, because I said we do have a question from one of our guests here today. Are there any other panelists that would like to say anything before we open the floor for some dialogue today?
There's a question here about Lee Atwater, as he was, and I remember when he made this when this statement came out anyway, he was an assistant or something, I think the first George Bush, if I'm not mistaken. Mark, do you know what his
title?
I think I usually hear about him associated with the Nixon administration. So I think
okay.
involved in a successive string of Republican administrations with various titles in their, you know, kind of, you know, the presidency, you know, they have various staff. So I don't know his title, but I believe he was involved for a number of years.
Right.
Kind of a, you know, campaign / administration official.
Yeah. Like an advisor.
Yeah.
And I think getting back to what Yvette said about dog whistle politics, he was, you know, he invented dog whistle politics. And the question was, is every politician who uses that language, are they being racist like Atwater suggests? And you know, social scientists don't use terms like every or all, but many of them do. You know, many of them learned very quickly. You know, what one he didn't mention was welfare queen, for example. You know, when we hear the term, you know, welfare or welfare queen, we kind of have a picture in our mind who this person is, and that's not necessarily the case. You know, there was one example of one woman who was a welfare fraud, and so out of her came this idea of welfare queen. But there have been many white people busted, many from, for example, big scandals in New York, the Hasidic community being charged with welfare fraud. So it is not just exclusive to one race of people that you have that. In fact, there's a county in Kentucky, Owsley County, Kentucky, where I think 98% of the people are white, and 99% of the people are using food stamps. So it is a distortion. It is manipulative, and I think that's the word that Tim Wise uses. It is manipulative because it suggests that if we distrust each other, we can never be united. J. Edgar Hoover said that the worst thing that could ever happen in the United States is if black people started unifying, right? Because black unity means that you know, you all see what the problem is in your communities. It is the system. It is not, you know, the mother getting a $400 check to feed her kids every month.
Couldn't say it better.
I think we've got a couple more questions, but I just wanted to know if, oh, am I muted?
Well, no, you were just a little low.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes,
okay.
Better.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if you all had ever seen that comic strip that went around shortly after the welfare queen title kind of became popular, and it's a drawing of a Black woman, and she's in a Cadillac, and it's basically depicting Black women as as misusing the welfare system for flashy gains. And I just thought that when they talked about the amount of women, or the demographic of people that actually receive welfare compared to the perception, and then also Professor Texeira, you brought that up, just how much that impacts the treatment that our community receives. And yeah, I just really think that obviously changing perceptions about our community, correcting the misperceptions about our community, advocating for those who are creating those perceptions to retract them, is going to hopefully improve our situation around policing, and improve the training or whatever implementations that are going to be made to address police officers and their relationship with our community.
That was well said, Yvette. The latest example for me, we've been sort of, Tim Wise was more or less concentrating on the African American community, but think about the hate crimes that have gone up in the last 4 months because of the coronavirus. And what ethnic group have those hate crimes been directed at? And that's people who are perceived to be Chinese or Asian, right? When you have our president calling it I know he's had some pretty, he thinks he's very clever, but he's had some pretty clever names for, what do you call it? The
Chinese flu. What did he call it when it first came?
But there's another name that he calls it, but it's essentially racist. It's the Chinese flu, and in spite of Dr. Fauci and others trying to correct him on that, he is he's continuing to throw out that dog whistle politics. Well, it did come from China, didn't it? So it is reinforcing the idea. And look at how fast Americans jumped all over that. White Americans jumped all over that. Not even 24 hours later, or the Hong Kong flu, or there was things like that. In the chat, people are the Wuhan flu, exactly. But look at how quickly people are react to that. I mean, it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much to get to. I always describe racism as like a Pavlovian sense, that most people who are racist don't even think of themselves as racist, do not definitely label themselves as racist, but they react just like, people, when a young Black man walks into an elevator, what do people automatically do? Grab their wallets and grab their purses, right? Not even processing that information that, wait a minute, young Black man, and don't do what Tim Wise did when he was confronted with these two pilots, right? He says, are they going to be able to fly this plane? But the anti-racist, they check themselves on that, because I might have even said, oh my God, 2 Black pilots, are we safe, right? But then you check yourself on that, because we all have been raised in a racist society where we learn the same lessons that white Americans learn. So we engage in a kind of self-hatred in many ways. But we know better, and when like Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you do better, right? Are any other questions to address, Marlo?
Yeah, I want to I want to, because I'm not sure, I'm unaware of what's going on in Portland. Do you guys have any information on
What's the
protests in
question about?
Portland?
What is it about Portland?
There's a protest going on in Portland, but
Yeah.
I'm uneducated
As
on
far
that
as
one.
I know, it's a BLM protest, but I'm not sure if it's in reaction to
Right,
something
right.
local or.
Yeah, I can't comment on it. I don't know anything
Okay.
about it.
I was wondering if we had any info on that one. But just to continue the dialogue on today's show, living in a country that was built off labor, built off, you have to work to, when we're in these positions and we talk about the different class, the different ethnicities, and we're in these positions, and let's just hone it in. Let's just talk about San Bernardino for a second. We're in a city, one of the largest county in the nation, but we're in this huge city of San Bernardino itself, where most of the jobs here in San Bernardino are just warehouse jobs. Um, Nothing really career oriented for the staple of San Bernardino's community, which is CSUSB. So when it comes to graduating students, we don't have any retention program. Or how do we get these graduates back into our community to increase the economic development of San Bernardino itself? There's no appeal to graduates after they accept their degree. It's I'm out of here. We take that degree and we go everywhere else with it. The same thing with the working class of San Bernardino. They may work hard in the city, but they go everywhere else to spend their dollar because the quality of life in your own community, in your own town, just isn't where you want it to be. There's no entertainment. There's no, there's just nothing safe for your community to go out and do. And this is what many communities across the nation face. Many communities, countless communities across this nation face these same things, whether growing up in or whether you have to leave the comfort of your community to go into a community to work where you don't feel as safe, and all of these different things. And now everyone is completely, everyone's has a constraint of a bias in them. And just like you said, you could check yourself when you recognize it. If I see two African American pilots, my first instinct is, whoa, have I ever seen this before? But you check yourself instantly. And a lot of people, and when we watched the Tim Wise film just now, a 90-year-old woman called into a show and expressed her, but at the very end of the conversation said, but I'm not a racist, goodbye. You know, so we have to continue to check these things. We have to continue to keep these type of conversations going, because that's the only way you know. If you're only talking to other people who see or shares the same ideologies as yourself, then you're only getting the same results. If you're constantly complaining about that race, but never, I don't work around that race. My kids don't go to school with that race. I don't have any friends of that race, and you can't share that opinion, then you'll never fully understand what we mean by there's no equality in this system or in this society itself. So that's another part. Living in a city that's full of only labor positions, labor jobs. It's just a further, a further notion of, wow, like, this is really what they see for this community. It's easy to build. If you could build a warehouse, you could build telemarketing, anything that'll put you into a career oriented state. But if you could build tons of warehouses, 20 something warehouses in one city, then that shows the development plan that you have for the citizens of the residents of that community. That's what you see them as. So another big, huge part of me getting into politics in my city was because we wanted to change that. We wanted to change the economic future of our citizens, of the grandkids that get to go out and play at which parks, what's safe, the response time from 911 calls. We want to change these type of things, not continue this. I know from 2018 to 2019 alone, homelessness in San Bernardino itself went up 27% in 1 year. That many people claim homeless the following year, just 27% in one city. So how do we decrease these things? How do we retract this and as a future graduate, as a soon to be graduate, I want to get out into my community and you know, brush off that degree and really show them that, okay, let's go, guys. You know, let's do this. And we need more of that support for that local level. But when we talk about voting, we talk about voter registration and civic engagement, we often overlook the local level. We often overlook the local officials that we put in office that say that they're going to do the things that you need for your community, that you need for your kids' schooling. For, you know, I think we just had a huge educational scandal going on with where parents were bribing, you know, colleges to get their kids into them, you know, things like that. And it wasn't black people, you know. So that just further showed that we have no say so. We can be overlooked when it comes to education, when it comes to careers, when it comes to uh, housing. We could be overlooked where others can simply just be an alumni and, you know, donate a library, or you know, we don't have those same opportunities as. So until we can see more black pilots, more black the ones that build buildings, architectures, more more, you know, just you know, it's 2020, we're still seeing every day, you know, the first black person to do this, the first black Miss America, the first black, you know, come on, guys. We can't keep walking around blind. So if you still feel like you can see these things and still accept that, oh well, everybody has the same opportunities, so they should stop complaining, then you're wrong. You're wrong.
How does all that relate? Because we originally got together, the handful of us, to talk about race in the police.
Mhm.
So do you think, you know, police officer getting on a plane, you know, just carrying on with that example, getting on a plane and seeing 2 black pilots, do you think that's going to make him a more effective police officer? How do you think this relates to this discussion that relates to of racism? How does that then transfer to making police departments serve the community better?
We spoke in the I think every week in the last few weeks we spoke on you know, how we can get police involvement more relatable to the communities that they serve. And one was, you know, having community police officers live in the community that they serve. But we also talked about how did we get here? You know, the systemic side of how did we get here? And we talked about how police are, you know, their language when it comes to training an officer puts them into the motion of how they serve when they get out into the communities. Same thing in the military, same thing in education. You know, the language that you use tends to strike how we're going to serve this public. You know, what resources would be available to who would benefit more. So how that transfers into officers and just you know, in the same sense of seeing, you know, hop on the plane and you see a plane full of black people in first class for the first time. You've never seen that. Oh, what's all these black people doing up here? You know, how do we make it a norm to where these aren't the first questions that come to us? It's a question of, oh, where's my seat? You know, I'm not thinking about the faces. Where's my seat? You know, watching the Tim Wise film, it just opened up not more questions for me, but just how I react to a lot more situations going forward. I think it's more important now to be more aware of what's going on. You know, we may work so hard, and obtaining a degree is not an easy thing. Obtaining a degree of any community college, university, private, of any sense is not an easy task. That's years and dedication and sacrifices to obtain. So when we get that, when we obtain that, and when we get that degree, we're automatically in the sense of, wow, I can go out there and serve now. I can go serve. I can't be turned away. And when you're still turned away because of your background. Oh, is my speaker out?
No.
Oh,
I can
Yes.
hear you okay. I can hear you okay. You know, I'm thinking, and thank you for that
Yeah.
that answer, Marlo. And I'm also thinking if anyone else has any, if you want to chime in on this, but it appears that in terms of policing, there have been many things tried through the years to get officers to conform and to really respect the people in the neighborhoods that they are patrolling. And it's the vast majority of police officers in this country are still white men. Even with the infusion of women and people of color, it does not seem to have helped the problem. And so I'm pretty excited about, you know, well, if you don't want to conform, then we will break you guys up. We're going to defund you.
Yeah, and that kind of keys in on something that I was going to say as well. So if I could just jump in for a second.
Sure, please.
Before I comment on that, just looking at some of the kind of organizers' conversation that I see, want to give a plug to the library on our, CSUSB campus and some of the online films that we have available. The Tim Wise film that we started with, talking about white pathology, the pathology of privilege.
Yes.
The name of that one. Students, faculty, and staff can access that for free. And so if you wanted to see the rest of the video that we started with, that's available, as well as the one that we just saw, I believe is also available, that one, White Like Me. So just to give a plug to some of our resources, if anyone would like to watch it again or share it with friends and family and so forth. But so going back to what Dr. Texeira was just saying, in terms of kind of how this conversation around the pilot metaphor applies to our topic of policing, unfortunately, what we oftentimes have, instead of seeing two Black pilots and thinking, oh no, the perception is that we see our police officers, as well as the general public, will see, African Americans, oftentimes of any age, young, old, oftentimes male, female, but particularly kind of young Black men, or even young Black women of a, 18 to, so teenager to kind of early age. We'll see those folks, or our police officers will see those folks and will assume criminal, right? Won't think, oh no, the plane's gonna crash. They're gonna think, drug dealer or thug or threat. And so of course that then plays into these very harsh tactics of, stop and frisking or throwing people on the ground, putting the knee on the neck, and end up, shooting people. And so, on the one hand, I think this conversation then reflects onto the need for the kind of awareness that I think that Marlo was talking about, the way in which, being more aware, having police officers who are more aware of these biases, they can check themselves ideally, and they can sort of perhaps move past it, or at least have some greater response to these kind of biases. So I think the conversation around training, I think Yvette mentioned this as well, is part of the conversation, and I think that should continue to be looked at. But on a deeper level, going back to Professor Texeira again, the conversation around defunding, right? The conversation around, okay, we've tried these reforms, maybe they've worked in some ways, maybe they haven't. We certainly should continue to look at reforms. But as another approach, let's think about how, we can use the funding that's now going to no-knock raids or, going to aggressive policing reforms, SWAT teams and so forth. Let's perhaps use that money to address these kinds of long-standing patterns of inequality, school funding, access to public spaces or libraries or parks, access to recreation, support for other kinds of job training or, kinds of investment that Marlo is talking about, right? I mean, San Bernardino, what kind of things could we do to boost the economy to help keep our CSUSB graduates local if we use some of the money that's now going to, you know, incarceration and building more jails and so forth. I think that conversation around, you know, reallocating funds, how can we use our tax dollars in a way that's smarter, in a way that perhaps gets at some of these things that, again, go back decades and decades, I think is also an important part of the conversation. And I am encouraged to see that really taking a certain, taking part of the attention that it wasn't getting, say, 6 months ago, a year ago, right? I mean, the conversation around, you know, defunding the police would have been dismissed as just completely bonkers a year ago. Whereas now I think there's much more of a engagement, even if a lot of people are still skeptical of it, there's at least a kind of engagement with, okay, well, what does that look like? What does that mean? Which I think is encouraging. And I really do think that a kind of reallocation of funding should also be part of potential remedies, along with trainings or along with looking at tactics and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think when you were saying that, Mark, there's a section of LA called Willowbrook, and it's you know, by Linwood, Compton, in that area. And a few years ago, they built this huge complex called the quote unquote justice system. And it's a beautiful place, beautiful series of buildings, and it stands in stark contrast to the neighborhood itself, where you have the, you know, it's almost, maybe ironic is not a good term for it, but I'll use it, almost ironic that you have the most beautiful building in the neighborhood that is used to put people in prison. And this is not just in Willowbrook, but that one comes to mind because I think there might have been a story or two about it in the newspaper. But you go to any area, it's the churches and the police stations, which are usually beautifully landscaped, lots of money, lots of lighting at night, and instead of doing that, putting money into that, do put it into resources for the community, because policing doesn't do anything for the economic growth of a community. It just does not. And I am really, really encouraged, as is Dr. Robinson, with this, the conversation is starting. Because if someone had said to me 6 months ago, defund policing, I would have said, are you nuts? What do you mean? What do you mean? But, you know, when you hear experts talk about it, it makes a lot of sense that, you know, in the past, police departments, just like the military, have had a sort of blank check. And now we're saying to them, you no longer get a blank check. We're now taking money from you, because you don't need it. You don't need tanks. You don't need bazookas. You know, you don't, these are citizens of the United States of America. These are your fellow citizens. So why would you come in there looking like an occupying army? We need you to respect people in the community. We need you to serve people in the community. And if it can be done in white communities, it can certainly be done in communities of color. They do it in white communities all day, every day. They just don't do it in our communities.
Right before you wrap up, just to touch on that a little, I'm from Jacksonville, Florida. Our neighboring, and that's Duval County. Our neighboring county is Clay County, and I saw what the sheriff there in Clay County deputized all citizens to the right to shoot if anyone comes looting. This when the looting was going on at the time. He deputized anyone the right to shoot them if they try to loot or break into your property or your business or anything. And I thought that was it was a commercial. It just wasn't just you know, a report that you could read. It was a commercial ad that he actually took out, and he's talking in every deputy is stationed behind them, you know, hands down like this, you know, it's the form of a gang, you know. That's the way it looks. So I just watched that and I'm like, wow, like as they try to dismember gangs, you know, it seems like they just want to be the #1 top gang in the nation, just police authority, which, you know, policemen are the bottom of the barrel when it comes to law enforcement, isn't it? You know, they're not the highest standard. You know, you could tell by the level of training and that they go through. You know, we don't see the best of an officer in our situations. You know, we could be getting pulled over for something simply as rolling through a stop sign, and it can uproot your family in the nick of that, just based off of training, just based off of you being in fear of your life, you know, for asking me to reach for my wallet and things like that. So if
But the
defunding,
best, I'm sorry, the best are, from our standpoint, they're not the best, right?
that's right.
But from the police department standpoint, they are, because they're seen as, you know, aggressive. They're out there, you know, knocking heads and you know, hooking people up and taking them to jail. A friend of mine once said to me, if the best thing, he was in law enforcement, he said the best thing that ever happened to him was getting arrested on a Friday night for warrants. And, you know, usually if you're arrested for warrants, you bail yourself right out, but not on a Friday night, right? You got to spend the weekend in jail. And he said that is the best thing that ever happened to him, because he saw how disruptive someone being arrested can be to your life. You can lose your job just for being in jail a couple of days. Now imagine if you're innocent and you're in jail for 6 months. You know, your entire life has been ruined. And he said he never took people getting arrested for granted. He said, I always arrested for a real crime and not, you know, drugs or whatever. So I think that his sensitivity to that kind of thing is absent in the main in police officers. They don't see how traumatic their actions are. I was watching the video of Sandra Bland when she was stopped, and for this young woman to say what her rights were, you know, because they knew they were being taped. She said, I don't have to do this. I don't have to. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't yelling. And we now know that a few days later, she, you know, quote unquote, killed herself in jail. And she was on her way to a job, you know, a job that was going to lead to a career. Yet her life is ended because she angered some officer.
Yeah, I mean, that's the just to kind of pick up on that point, and I thank everyone for their comments as we kind of wrap up. I think the question around examples like, you know, the Sandra Bland or Breonna Taylor, right, where we have this kind of a really sort of over-aggressive response, people kicking down doors or jacking people up, you know, for you know, just as Sandra Bland was doing, you know, expressing her rights. You know, get out of the car and, you know, shut up and, you know, put your hands behind your back, right? That type of policing, that type of law enforcement gets at an issue of what do we really want our society to do, right? Or what is public safety? Is public safety about making people fearful of police officers or other kinds of authority? Is it about punishment and about, you know, kicking down people's doors and making them, you know, back down or kind of cower in fear? Or is it about creating an environment where everyone in the society, or at least the vast majority, can thrive, can get a job, can, you know, start their own business, can, you know, enjoy a basketball game or a barbecue without having to feel threatened or feel like they have to be concerned. That type of model, if we think about public safety in a more broader fashion, I would argue is actually as important, if not more important, to creating safety, right? Creating those kind of environments of economic opportunity and education and healthcare and public safety and housing and so forth. That's important to creating safety, perhaps more important than what the police officers do. Because in a sense, when the police show up, even if a crime is committed, something has gone wrong, right? Want that. That's sort of a breakdown of how society should function. You know, people, okay, I'll try to get to the point. So to try to get to what I'm trying to say here is that if we think that crime, be it black on black crime, I saw one of the comments is kind of asking about kind of the issue of black on black crime. If we think about crime or law breaking as a function of lack of opportunity, a lack of access to resources, poverty, hunger, as opposed to a reflection of somebody's kind of moral failing or them being a bad person, right? If we truly believe that for the vast majority, crime happens because there's not a lot of other good options for folks, and they're dealing with, you know, drug addiction, or they're dealing with mental health issues, or they're dealing with hunger, poverty, and so forth, right? Then it means that addressing those issues needs to do more than just be about police officers getting tough, right? Addressing those issues needs to get to, you know, those things I'm mentioning, right? You know, everything from education to healthcare to, you know, housing and, you know, clean drinking water and all these kind of other things. And really that's what I think this conversation around defunding or really reallocating funds really helps us to get to, is thinking about how all these things are really a part of public safety. All these things are part of why there are issues of crime in many Black communities. And having more policing is not going to get us to the solution that we want. And so unfortunately, places like Chicago, right, you hear these kind of news reports of all kinds of violence, certainly tragic and certainly worth our attention. But I would argue that in order to, you know, get to a better place, bigger police budgets is not going to do it. Whereas creating a social safety net, creating, you know, various kinds of investments in those communities are actually going to get us more to where we want to go and create, in the long run, a much more safe and effective kind of public strategy for our society.
And maybe that's a good place for us to end, Marlo, you think? Because we're probably very close to to our time. So we definitely want to thank everyone for hanging with us from week to week. I see some of the same names.
Yes, definitely. Definitely thank you all for returning with us every week on Conversations on Race and Policing, the series. Pretty soon we will have all of our following weeks posted for you guys to go back and whatever week you missed or you want to share conversations that you've seen with different community figures and leaders. All of those things are going to be coming soon for you guys. So stay tuned for that. We appreciate you coming back every week, and we'll see you the same time next week. Yvette and I, we're honored to have you all. Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists today. For the great discussion and the great film. And I hope you guys got the links so that you can go and share it with your peers as well. And without further ado, guys, we'll see you next week. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
All. Thank you.
Thank you. And sorry, Allie, we didn't get to your question, but we'll try to get to it next week.
That's right.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.